Hi, boys and girls. It's Grandma Sheila again, and I've come to tell you another story. Are you ready? The story today is called The Keeper of the Light. And behind me, you'll see here is a lighthouse. Our story is about a lighthouse. And in years gone by, and this story comes from a way back, there was no electricity that went into the lighthouses. So they had lamps that went all the way around the windows in the very top of the lighthouse up here. And they used coal oil or kerosene to have for the oil in it that they burned to make the lights. So the light keeper would have to go from his little house down here. See, this is his little house. He would have to walk up the staircase. There was a winding staircase that went like this all the way to the top. Well, the lightkeeper in our story lived in his little lighthouse and took care of the light. And his daughter Mary lived there with him. Now, Mary wasn't very old. And the sad thing was that several years prior to this, Mary's mommy had died. So Mary lived in the lighthouse with her daddy, the lighthouse keeper. Well, Mary liked it there. And one morning, when Daddy got up and he came down to talk to Mary, he said, "Mary, it's supposed to storm. See the clouds way over there? I think that I should go into the village today." And he lifted up his kerosene can. He said, "I put the last of it up in the lights this morning, and I trimmed all the wicks so it's ready for tonight when we go to light it. But I need to get some more kerosene, and he had his basket in his other hand, I need to get us a few groceries." "Don't be afraid, Mary. Jesus is here with you, and I will be back before it gets dark." Well, Daddy always told the truth, so Mary wasn't worried. She kissed her daddy goodbye, and Daddy went out. He went down the rock embankment, down to what they called the causeway. Now, causeway was a little path that went from like a big grouping of rocks up to the beach. But the thing about a causeway is when the tide comes in from the ocean, when the waves come rolling in, it covers that whole causeway with water. And then you can't walk on it anymore. So there was only a few hours during the day when it would be dry and Daddy could go to the village. He went across the causeway just fine, and he started down the beach. But what Daddy didn't know was behind some great big rocks, there were several very wicked, evil men. And those men were what they called wreckers. And what they did was they waited for storms to come in hopes that the big sailing ships of those days, when they were coming over the big waves, for some reason, they might hit smack into a big rock and the boat might break all to pieces. that wouldn't be a good thing at all. Those were awful men. And those men had a terrible plan. They knew from looking at all those black clouds that there was going to be a storm that night. They also knew that if the light keeper wasn't at the lighthouse, there would be nobody to light the lamps. And then the sailors and their boats would go crashing into the rocks. That was a horrible plan. That wasn't nice at all. But they stood behind those rocks. And when Daddy, the light keeper came walking along, they jumped out from behind those rocks and they grabbed Daddy and they took a rope and they tied his arms together and they tied his legs together and they picked him up. And over down the beach a little ways, there was a little shed. They opened the shed and they threw Daddy in and they shut the door. And those wicked men, they left 2 men there to watch to make sure Daddy didn't get out. And the others went back behind the rocks to wait and see if any ships were going to come close and break all to pieces on the rocks, so that when the tide came in, they could go out and gather up all the boxes and everything that was stored in the bottom of the ship. And they could steal it and they could sell it. So they stayed there waiting. Poor Daddy. Daddy tried to make his arms pound on the wooden floor, and he kept calling out, "Please, please let me out. My little girl's in the lighthouse all alone. There's a storm coming. Please let me out. I've got to light the lights." But they just laughed. Oh, they thought it was so funny. Their plan was working. There was nothing Daddy could do. Or was there? Then Daddy remembered. And Daddy, he couldn't fold his hands, but he sure could close his eyes. And he said, "Oh, Father up in heaven, you know that Mary's in the lighthouse all alone and there's a storm coming. You know there's nobody to light the lights. Father in heaven, please send her somebody to help her. Please." Well, there was nothing more Daddy could do, so he just kept talking to God up in heaven. Meanwhile, back in the lighthouse, Mary, she was busy doing, she played with her little teddy bear. He kept her company when there wasn't anybody else there. And she would generally go out and sit on the rocks, and she and Teddy would watch the waves coming in. But by now, it was starting to storm. So she and Teddy watched out the window, and she told Teddy, "Now, Teddy, we're going to watch for Daddy to come, okay?" Teddy agreed. So they sat up and they watched. Daddy should be coming any time. She looked up at the big clock. It was 6 o'clock. Daddy should be coming home. It was almost dark. Oh, dear Jesus, please send Daddy home. I hope Daddy comes soon, Teddy. Well, time passed, and the sun went down behind the ocean, and it was dark. Mary and Teddy were there all alone. And when Mary was looking out the windows, she saw the waves crashing up on the rocks that held the little lighthouse up out of the ocean. And she could hear the wind whistling. It was blowing all the way around, and it was making the waves go bigger and bigger and bigger. She was all alone. And she knew Daddy wasn't going to get to come now, because once the water came over the causeway, there was no walking on it then. They'd have to wait till tomorrow. She picked up Teddy again and she said, "What are we going to do?" So she took Teddy and she started climbing up the staircase. Now, I don't know if you've ever been inside of a lighthouse. I have. The stairs, it's a big empty tube, and the stairs go all around the outside of the wall, and they go up and up and up, long, long ways. And Mary, she gently went up the stairs with her daddy when he went up to light the lights. So she knew how Daddy did it. But when she got to the top of the stairs, she set Teddy down and she started walking around. And when she put her hands up, it didn't make any difference because the lights were so high. And she thought, "Oh, Daddy has a stepladder." So she went and she pulled the stepladder. She got a match and the matchbox. And remember, I told you that these lights weren't electric lights, so they were like kerosene lamps, and she would have to light each one of those wicks. Well, she climbed up the ladder, but when she got to the top and she reached, she just wasn't tall enough. She got back down and she thought, "What can I do? Oh, Teddy, what can I do?" Teddy didn't seem to have any answers either. And so she went down the stairs. And when she got downstairs, she looked around their little tiny house. And then she saw it. They had a little table that they kept the lamp on. Now, Mary decided that if she brought the table upstairs, she could set the ladder on it and she could probably reach the lights. So, remember I told you that those stairs went around the outside of that big tube of a lighthouse inside of it? And you could see from the top all the way down to the bottom, which was scary to climb, just climbing, holding on. But imagine carrying a table. Well, Mary knew that was her only chance. So she started up the stairs, one step at a time, and she'd set the table on the edge of the next step, and she'd step up and up on the next one. And she did that till she got to the very top, up where the windows were, where the lamps were, in the very top of the lighthouse. When she got up there, she was out of breath. But she knew she couldn't wait any longer. It was dark outside, and any time the ships could sail into the rocks. So she pushed the table over. She put the ladder up on top of it. And she climbed up to the top. And she reached. Oh, she reached so high. But her hands were about this far from where she needed to light the wicks. What was she going to do? And she remembered that her mommy had always said, when you need help, you ask Jesus. So she bowed her head and she folded her hands and she said, Jesus, I have a terrible problem. I know how to light the lights, but I can't get up there. I'm too little. Please help me. I'm too little. Help me to think of something. And then she said, Amen. She thought again, what would be just this big that she could put underneath of all those things? And then she thought of something. Her mother had a big family Bible. It was big, and it was about this thick. And she thought, no, I can't stand on the Bible. That's God's word. But then she got to thinking about it. Do you think it would be okay with God if I stood on it to save all the sailors' lives? She thought of that. Yes, I think so. So she took the Bible. She couldn't bring Teddy this time because she didn't have any hands. But she climbed the stairs. When she got up, she put it down. She put the little tiny table on top of it. She put the ladder on top of the table. Ooh, hopefully it would stand still enough. She climbed up on top of the table. She climbed up on top of the ladder, and she had the matchbox in one hand and the match in the other hand. And she got up to the top of the ladder, and she reached. It was just tall enough. She tripped, and she lit the match. Let me show you. She lit the match, and she climbed up, and she put it up as high as she could, and she lit the first lamp, and all the way around she would scoot the table and the Bible and the ladder, and then she'd climb up and she would light the next one till she had lit every one of those lights. You know, those lights weren't just a little bitty light like you saw with the match, because all the way around the outside of them were mirrors. So it reflected the light out into the water, big. And as Mary lit each light, the light got bigger and it went all the way around the lighthouse. Mary, oh, I'm so glad. Now it didn't matter if the waves were crashing all over the rocks and if the wind was blowing so badly. The lights were lit and the sailors would be saved. Oh, she was so glad. And you know what? In that dark little shed where Daddy was still tied up, all of a sudden he saw light reflecting in what had been that dark window of the shed. And he went, Jesus must have sent somebody to help Mary light the lights. Oh, thank you, Father, thank you. Then he didn't feel quite so bad, because there must be somebody there with Mary. Well, that was a long night for everybody. And you know, the sailors out on the ocean in their big ships. This is a ship that my husband built, but their ships were like this. They had been running around over the waves in the dark when suddenly they saw the light of the lighthouse. And they were so thankful They knew which way to go. They said, "The rocks are that way, go that way." And they turned the ship, and they didn't hit the rocks or get caught in the sandbars. They were saved. And out there on the side of the beach, those naughty men that had such a bad plan, that wanted the boats to be all bashed to pieces on the rocks, their plan had been foiled. Somebody had lit the lights. Well, the next morning, the storm had died down. And in the light, Daddy was able to see something that could help him to get out of those ropes. And he gathered his can and his bag. He hadn't got to the village, but he wanted to see if Mary was all right. But the causeway still had water over it, so he had to wait for the ocean tide to go out. And then he ran as fast as he could across the causeway, up the rocks, up to the little house by the lighthouse. And there sat Mary with Teddy. "Oh, Daddy, Daddy, I lit the lights." And Daddy said, "You lit the lights?" Now Mary was she was probably about this big. Daddy was amazed. "How did you light the lights?" And Mary told him about asking Jesus for help and her thinking of the table and then thinking of the Bible and wanting to save the sailors, and that she'd prayed and she'd been all right all night. You know, you can be like a lighthouse to other people. You can be a shining light that helps show them the right way to go. You can be an example to them to help them from doing bad things. Whenever you see a lighthouse, I want you to think that you can be a light for Jesus. Goodbye now. We'll see you again next time. And God go with you and help you be a light. Thank you. Bye-bye.